Sometimes love costs us everything we hold dear. In 1884, young Apache Kiko found a crying mountain lion cub and couldn't leave it to die. His tribe called it forbidden and dangerous. When Kiko refused to abandon the cub, he named Sani his own. People banished him. 4 years passed in the wilderness. Now Kiko has returned. No longer a boy, but a weathered man. Beside him walks Sani, the cub now a full-grown mountain lion who follows like a loyal dog. But his tribe faces new troubles. White settlers push closer each day, and his people are divided. What happens when the outcast returns with the very creature that got him cast out? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Red Canyons of the Southwest had always been home to the Chiricahua Apache, their sandstone walls holding generations of stories in their carved faces. In the spring of 1880, when Kiko was still young enough to believe the world would bend, to kindness, the desert bloomed with purple lupine and golden poppies that painted the landscape like an ancient prayer rug. The boy who would one day walk beside a mountain lion spent those early mornings learning to read the language of the land from his uncle, Chief Nalnish. The earth speaks to those who listen, Nalnish would say, his weathered hands pointing to tracks invisible to untrained eyes. Every stone, every bent blade of grass tells a story. Your grandfather could track a hummingbird across the sky by reading the way flowers turned their faces. Kiko absorbed these lessons like desert soil drinks rare rain. At 15, he could follow a deer trail 3 days old, distinguish between the footprints of cousins and find water where others saw only rock. But even then, his uncle noticed something different about the boy. While other young warriors learned to hunt with fierce pride, Kiko moved through the desert with unusual gentleness, as if apologizing to each plant he disturbed. Their camp nestled in a natural amphitheater where ancient waters had carved protective walls from living stone. Adobe dwellings clustered around a central fire pit where the tribe gathered each evening to share meals and stories. Women worked beautiful patterns into baskets and clothing, while children played games that taught them stealth and strategy. The air always carried the scent of pinon smoke and the wild sage that grew in silver patches across the mesa. Chief Nalnish wore his authority like a comfortable coat, never needing to raise his voice to command respect. His war lance, passed down from his grandfather, stood beside his dwelling, an ornate piece carved with symbols representing the 4 directions and crowned with eagle feathers that caught every breeze. The lance had seen battles against Mexican soldiers, rival tribes, and now increasingly frequent encounters with American settlers who spoke of ownership over land that had never belonged to anyone. These white men measure the desert in squares. Nalnish told the tribal council one evening as Kiko listened from the shadows. They cannot understand that the earth is not something to be possessed, like a horse or a rifle. It is something to be lived with, honored, protected. But even among his own people, Nalnish faced growing pressure. Takoda, a warrior 10 years younger than the chief, argued for more aggressive resistance to the encroaching settlements. Tall and broad-shouldered, with scars from 3 different battles marking his arms, Takoda painted his face with red and black stripes that made his angular features appear fierce as a hawk. He believed the Apache had grown too soft, too willing to negotiate when they should be fighting. Our grandfathers would not recognize us, Takoda would say during heated council meetings. We talk of peace while our hunting grounds shrink like puddles in summer heat. Soon, there will be nothing left to defend. Caught between these opposing forces was Ayana, the medicine woman's daughter, whose beauty was matched only by her intelligence. 3 years younger than Kiko, she had learned to read and write from a missionary teacher before the tribe decided outside education was too dangerous. Her knowledge of both Apache traditions and the white world made her valuable to the council, but it also set her apart from other young women her age. Ayana had been making a beaded necklace for over a year, working on it whenever her hands were free from grinding corn or preparing medicines. The pattern told the story of a journey: blue beads for water, white for clouds, yellow for sun, and green for the new growth that followed rain. She never spoke of who the necklace was intended for, but Kiko often caught her watching him when she thought no one would notice. The boy himself seemed unaware of the quiet attention he received. While other young men competed in wrestling matches and horse races, Kiko preferred to slip away into the canyons with his small medicine pouch, a Kia leather bag his grandmother had made, decorated with symbols representing protection and wisdom. He would sit for hours in quiet spots, observing how light changed the color of rock walls, how different birds chose different heights for their nests, how even the smallest plants found ways to thrive in impossible places. It was this habit of solitary wandering that led Kiko to the discovery that would change everything. The morning started like any other in late summer, with heat already rising from the canyon floor before the sun cleared the eastern rim. Kiko had been tracking a wounded deer, not to kill it, but to see if it would survive its encounter with a mountain lion. The trail led him deeper into the maze of side canyons than he had ever ventured, past rock formations that looked like ancient guardians and springs that bubbled from hidden sources. The crying reached him first. It was not quite the sound of a human child, but close enough to quicken his heartbeat. Following the plaintive wails, Kiko climbed over a pile of fallen boulders and found himself in a small, enclosed space where wildflowers grew in impossible abundance. Near a trickle of water that emerged from a crack in the wall, a tawny shape writhed in distress. The mountain lion cub was perhaps 8 weeks old, with oversized paws and blue eyes that would later turn amber. Its mother lay nearby, clearly dead for several days, probably from wounds inflicted by the same settlers' rifles that had been echoing through the canyons with increasing frequency. The cub had stayed close to its mother's body, crying for milk. That would never come, growing weaker by the hour. Kiko approached slowly, speaking in the gentle voice he used when calming frightened horses. The cub looked up at him with eyes full of confusion and need. It did not run. Perhaps it was too weak, or perhaps some instinct told it this human meant no harm. "Sani," Kiko whispered, using the Apache word for old one, though he wasn't sure why the name came to him. "Your mother cannot care for you now." He sat cross-legged beside the small creature, close enough to see that it was a female, thin but not yet dying. When Kiko extended his hand, the cub sniffed his fingers and began to purr, a sound like distant thunder that seemed to vibrate through the stone walls surrounding them. The decision should have been easy. Mountain lions were powerful predators, dangerous to humans and livestock alike. Apache tradition taught respect for such creatures, but also appropriate fear. A wise person did not invite a wolf or a bear or a mountain lion into their family. These animals had their place in the natural order, and that place was separate from human dwellings. But as Kiko looked into those blue eyes, all he could see was an orphaned child who would die without help. The same compassion that made him track wounded animals instead of healthy ones, that made him speak gently to frightened horses, that made him sit quietly in the desert, listening to stories only he seemed to hear. That compassion would not let him walk away. He took off his cotton shirt and wrapped the cub carefully, surprised by how light she felt in his arms. Sani settled against his chest with a sigh that sounded almost human, her small body radiating heat and trust. The walk back to camp took twice as long as usual because Kiko stopped frequently to let the cub rest and to think about what he would say to his people. He knew they would not understand. He knew they would be afraid. But as Sani's tiny paws kneaded against his ribs and her purring created a rhythm like a second heartbeat, Kiko also knew he could not abandon her to die alone in the desert. By the time the camp came into view, with smoke rising from cooking fires and children's voices echoing off canyon walls, Kiko had made his choice. He would face whatever consequences came from saving one small life. Some things, he told himself, were worth the risk. He had no way of knowing that this single act of compassion would lead to 4 years of exile, a complete transformation of his understanding of the world, and ultimately, the chance to save not just one life, but the future of his entire people. As he approached the first dwelling, his grandmother emerged to greet him. Her face brightened at the sight of her grandson, then grew puzzled as she noticed the bundle in his arms. "Grandson," she said in their language, her voice gentle but concerned, "what have you brought home from the desert?" Kiko took a deep breath and pulled back the edge of his shirt to reveal Sani's sleeping face. His grandmother's expression shifted, from puzzlement to alarm, but before she could speak, other members of the tribe began to gather around them. The confrontation he had been dreading was about to begin. The red canyons of the southwest had always been home to the Chiricahua Apache, their sandstone walls holding generations of stories in their carved faces. In the spring of 1880, when Kiko was still young enough to believe the world would bend to kindness, the desert bloomed with purple lupine and golden poppies that painted the landscape like an ancient prayer rug. The boy, who would one day walk beside a mountain lion, spent those early mornings learning to read the language of the land from his uncle, Chief Nalnish. "The earth speaks to those who listen," Nalnish would say, his weathered hands pointing to tracks invisible to untrained eyes. Every stone, every bent blade of grass tells a story. Your grandfather could track a hummingbird across the sky by reading the way flowers turned their faces. Kiko absorbed these lessons like desert soil drinks rare rain. At 15, he could follow a deer trail 3 days old, distinguish between the footprints of cousins, and find water where others saw only rock. But even then, his uncle noticed something different about the boy. While other young warriors learned to hunt with fierce pride, Kiko moved through the desert with unusual gentleness, as if apologizing to each plant he disturbed. Their camp nestled in a natural amphitheater where ancient waters had carved protective walls from living stone. Adobe dwellings clustered around a central fire pit, where the tribe gathered each evening to share meals and stories. Women worked beautiful patterns into baskets and clothing, while children played games that taught them stealth and strategy. The air always carried the scent of pinon smoke and the wild sage that grew in silver patches across the mesa. Chief Nalnish wore his authority like a comfortable coat, never needing to raise his voice to command respect. His war lance passed down from his grandfather stood beside his dwelling, an ornate piece carved with symbols representing the 4 directions and crowned with eagle feathers that caught every breeze. The lance had seen battles against Mexican soldiers, rival tribes, and now increasingly frequent encounters with American settlers who spoke of ownership over land that had never belonged to anyone. These white men measure the desert in squares. Nalnish told the tribal council one evening, as Kiko listened from the shadows, they cannot understand that the earth is not something to be possessed, like a horse or a rifle. It is something to be lived with, honored, protected. But even among his own people, Nalnish faced growing pressure. Takoda, a warrior 10 years younger than the chief, argued for more aggressive resistance to the encroaching settlements. Tall and broad-shouldered, with scars from 3 different battles marking his arms, Takoda painted his face with red and black stripes that made his angular features appear fierce as a hawk. He believed the Apache had grown too soft, too willing to negotiate when they should be fighting. "Our grandfathers would not recognize us," Takoda would say during heated council meetings. "We talk of peace, while our hunting grounds shrink like puddles in summer heat. Soon there will be nothing left to defend." Caught between these opposing forces was Ayana, the medicine woman's daughter whose beauty was matched only by her intelligence. 3 years younger than Kiko, she had learned to read and write from a missionary teacher before the tribe decided outside education was too dangerous. Her knowledge of both Apache traditions and the white world made her valuable to the council. but it also set her apart from other young women her age. Ayana had been making a beaded necklace for over a year, working on it whenever her hands were free from grinding corn or preparing medicines. The pattern told the story of a journey: blue beads for water, white for clouds, yellow for sun, and green for the new growth that followed rain. She never spoke of who the necklace was intended for, but Kiko often caught her watching him when she thought no one would notice. The boy himself seemed unaware of the quiet attention he received. While other young men competed in wrestling matches and horse races, Kiko preferred to slip away into the canyons with his small medicine pouch, a leather bag his grandmother had made, decorated with symbols representing protection and wisdom. He would sit for hours in quiet spots, observing how light changed the color of rock walls, how different birds chose different heights for their nests, how even the smallest plants found ways to thrive in impossible places. It was this habit of solitary wandering that led Kiko to the discovery that would change everything. The morning started like any other in late summer, with heat already rising from the canyon floor before the sun cleared the eastern rim. Kiko had been tracking a wounded deer, not to kill it, but to see if it would survive its encounter with a mountain lion. The trail led him deeper into the maze of side canyons than he had ever ventured, past rock formations that looked like ancient guardians and springs that bubbled from hidden sources. The crying reached him first. It was not quite the sound of a human child, but close enough to quicken his heartbeat. Following the plaintive wails, Kiko climbed over a pile of fallen boulders and found himself in a small, enclosed space where wildflowers grew in impossible abundance. Near a trickle of water that emerged from a crack in the wall, a tawny shape writhed in distress. The mountain lion cub was perhaps 8 weeks old, with oversized paws and blue eyes that would later turn amber. Its mother lay nearby, clearly dead for several days, probably from wounds inflicted by the same settlers' rifles that had been echoing through the canyons with increasing frequency. The cub had stayed close to its mother's body, crying for milk that would never come, growing weaker by the hour. Kiko approached slowly, speaking in the gentle voice he used when calming frightened horses. The cub looked up at him with eyes full of confusion and need. It did not run. Perhaps it was too weak, or perhaps some instinct told it this human meant no harm. "Sani," Kiko whispered, using the Apache word for old one, though he wasn't sure why the name came to him. "Your mother cannot care for you now." He sat cross-legged beside the small creature, close enough to see that it was a female, thin but not yet dying. When Kiko extended his hand, the cub sniffed his fingers and began to purr, a sound like distant thunder that seemed to vibrate through the stone walls surrounding them. The decision should have been easy. Mountain lions were powerful predators, dangerous to humans and livestock alike. Apache tradition taught respect for such creatures, but also appropriate fear. A wise person did not invite a wolf or a bear or a mountain lion into their family. These animals had their place in the natural order, and that place was separate from human dwellings. But as Kiko looked into those blue eyes, all he could see was an orphaned child who would die without help. The same compassion that made him track wounded animals instead of healthy ones, that made him speak gently to frightened horses, that made him sit quietly in the desert, listening to stories only he seemed to hear. That compassion would not let him walk away. He took off his cotton shirt and wrapped the cub carefully, surprised by how light she felt in his arms. Sani settled against his chest with a sigh that sounded almost human, her small body radiating heat and trust. The walk back to camp took twice as long as usual, because Kiko stopped frequently to let the cub rest and to think about what he would say to his people. He knew they would not understand. He knew they would be afraid. But as Sani's tiny paws kneaded against his ribs and her purring created a rhythm like a second heartbeat, Kiko also knew he could not abandon her to die alone in the desert. By the time the camp came into view, with smoke rising from cooking fires and children's voices echoing off canyon walls, Kiko had made his choice. He would face whatever consequences came from saving one small life. Some things, he told himself, were worth the risk. He had no way of knowing that this single act of compassion would lead to 4 years of exile, a complete transformation of his understanding of the world, and ultimately the chance to save not just one life, but the future of his entire people. As he approached the first dwelling, his grandmother emerged to greet him. Her face brightened at the sight of her grandson, then grew puzzled as she noticed the bundle in his arms. "Grandson," she said in their language, her voice gentle but concerned. "What have you brought home from the desert?" Kiko took a deep breath and pulled back the edge of his shirt to reveal Sani's sleeping face. His grandmother's expression shifted, from puzzlement to alarm, but before she could speak, other members of the tribe began to gather around them. The confrontation he had been dreading was about to begin. Kiko made his camp at the edge of tribal lands, close enough to be part of the community, but far enough away to avoid forcing anyone to confront Sani before they were ready. He built a simple shelter against a south-facing rock wall that would catch morning sun and deflect winter winds, using skills honed during 4 years of constant movement. Sani claimed a ledge above the shelter where she could observe approaches from 3 directions while remaining invisible to casual observers. The location served multiple purposes. It demonstrated respect for those who still feared the mountain. Lion, while positioning Kiko to help with hunting, scouting, and defense. Most importantly, it gave him space to prove his worth without threatening Takoda's authority or forcing Chief Nalnish into premature decisions about his permanent status. Ayana visited on the 3rd evening, bringing cornbread and stew that reminded Kiko how much he had missed the communal flavors of home. They sat by his small fire as full darkness settled over the canyon, speaking in the comfortable mix of Apache and English that had marked their childhood friendship. "Tell me about the necklace," Kiko said, nodding toward the beaded pattern that caught firelight around her neck. "You finished it." Ayana's hand moved unconsciously to touch the jewelry. "I finished it the day after you left. The pattern represents a journey that ends in return. You believed I would come back. I hoped you would come back. Hope and belief are different things." She fed a small piece of meat to Sani, who accepted it with gentle courtesy. "She has grown beautiful, dangerous, but beautiful. She saved my life more times than I can count," Kiko said, "not just from other predators or harsh weather, but from despair. Having someone to care for, someone who depended on me, it gave me reason to keep trying when everything seemed hopeless. And now, what gives you reason now that you're home?" The question hung in the desert air between them, loaded with implications neither was quite ready to address directly. Kiko understood that Ayana was asking about more than just his motivations for returning. "Our people are in danger," he said, finally. "Real danger, worse than when I left. I have skills now that might help. I have seen how the white world works, how their soldiers think, how their settlements grow. If I can use what I learned to protect the tribe, then the exile will have served a purpose." "Takoda thinks you have gone soft," Ayana said. "He tells people that living alone has made you weak, that you have forgotten what it means to be Apache." "Takoda sees strength only in anger and violence," Kiko replied. "There are other kinds of strength. The mountain lion does not roar to announce her presence. She moves quietly, strikes precisely, disappears without trace. She survives by adapting, not by fighting every battle." As if responding to her name, Sani emerged from the shadows and settled beside them with a contented rumble. Her presence still amazed Kiko. 4 years of partnership had not diminished his wonder at sharing his life with such a magnificent creature. "The children ask about her," Ayana said, scratching behind Sani's ears with the confidence of someone who had been accepted into the mountain lion's small circle of trusted humans. "They hear stories from the adults about the dangerous cat, but they also hear other stories about how she learned to hunt with you, how she kept you warm during cold nights, how she fought off wolves who would have killed you both." Stories grow in the telling, Kiko said, though he was pleased to learn that some tales portrayed Sani in a positive light. Some stories shrink in the telling too, Ayana pointed out. Some people want to forget that you were exiled for an act of compassion, not an act of selfishness. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses, moving fast enough to suggest urgency, but not panic. Kiko recognized his cousin Naicha's voice calling his name before the riders came into view. "Kiko, we need your help. 3 of our hunters left 2 days ago and have not returned. Their families grow worried." Naiche had been 12 when Kiko left. Now he was a young man, with the lean build of a natural scout and the worried expression of someone carrying adult responsibilities. Behind him rode 2 other warriors Kiko didn't recognize, both young enough to have joined the war party during his exile. Where were they hunting? Kiko asked, already moving toward the gear he kept ready for rapid departure. North Canyon, near the springs where we sometimes find deer. But their tracks vanish at the rocky ground above the second waterfall. We have searched for a full day and found nothing. Sani was on her feet before Kiko finished gathering his supplies, reading his body language and preparing for whatever adventure awaited them. Her ability to track scents days old across terrain that left no visible signs had saved them both countless times during their exile. "We will find them," Kiko promised, checking his knife and the small bell he had crafted to help track Sani during extended hunts. The copper bell bore intricate engravings that told the story of their partnership, a symbol of trust between species that most people considered natural enemies. The search party moved through moonlit canyons with the practiced quiet of men who had learned that noise could mean death. Kiko felt the familiar rhythm of working with his tribal brothers, the unspoken communication that allowed them to coordinate movements without revealing their position to potential enemies. But he also felt the subtle distance that marked his changed status. They trusted his skills, but they had not yet accepted him as truly one of them again. At the rocky ground where the official search had ended, Sani proved her worth within minutes. Her sensitive nose picked up scent traces invisible to human senses, leading the party toward a section of canyon they had not thought to explore. The trail led down instead of up, toward hidden spaces where flash floods had carved secret chambers from solid rock. They found the hunters alive, but trapped in a narrow chimney where one had fallen and injured his leg while the others had climbed down to help him. Without Sani's tracking ability, they might have died of thirst and exposure before anyone thought to search the lower reaches of the canyon system. The rescue took most of the night, requiring careful work with ropes and improvised stretchers to extract the injured man without causing further harm. By dawn, all 3 hunters were safely back at camp, receiving medical attention from the tribal healer. Word of the successful rescue spread quickly through the community. Kiko noticed subtle changes in how people looked at him and Sani. Less fear, more curiosity, the beginning of acceptance based on proven results rather than old prejudices. But not everyone was pleased by his success. As the sun climbed toward midday, Takoda approached Kiko's camp with several supporters, all armed and wearing expressions that suggested this was not a friendly visit. "Tracking skills do not wash away the stain of betraying tribal law," Takoda announced loudly enough for his words to carry to nearby dwellings. "One successful hunt does not prove that keeping a predator as a pet serves the good of our people." 3 lives saved, Kiko replied calmly. 3 families who still have their sons and fathers. If that is not serving the good of our people, then perhaps we define good differently. Pretty words, Takoda sneered, but words will not stop. Bullets when the soldiers come. Words will not feed children when the hunting grounds are taken. We need warriors, not beast tamers who think they can solve problems with tricks and sentiment. The confrontation was building toward something more serious than verbal sparring, but before it could escalate, Chief Nalnish arrived with several tribal elders. His presence changed the entire dynamic, reminding everyone that challenges to Tribal members had formal procedures that required official oversight. "Enough," the chief said simply. "Takoda, your concerns are noted. Kiko, your contribution is appreciated. Both of you will remember that we face enemies outside our canyon walls. We cannot afford to create more enemies within them." As the various factions dispersed, Kiko realized that his successful return to the tribe would require more than just proving his usefulness. He would have to find a way to bridge the growing divide between old ways and new necessities, between fear and hope, between the warrior who saw only threats and the healer who looked for solutions. The small copper bell around Sani's neck chimed softly as she padded through the pre-dawn darkness, leading Kiko toward scents and sounds that human senses could barely detect. 3 weeks had passed since the rescue of the trapped hunters, and gradually more tribal members had begun to see the mountain lion as something other than a threat. Children especially seemed drawn to her, though they were careful to maintain respectful distance. This morning's hunt was different from the others. Instead of tracking game, they were following human sign, the tracks and scent trail of a party of white men who had been observed near the eastern approaches to Apache territory. Chief Nalnish wanted to know their numbers, their weapons, their intentions, and whether they posed an immediate threat to the tribe. Sani had proven extraordinarily effective at this kind of surveillance. Her ability to move silently through terrain that would challenge even experienced Apache scouts, combined with her keen senses and natural camouflage, made her the perfect reconnaissance partner. She could approach close enough to enemy camps to gather detailed intelligence while remaining completely undetected. The trail led them through a maze of sandstone formations toward higher ground that offered views of the surrounding desert. As the sky lightened toward full dawn, Kiko could see smoke rising from what appeared to be a substantial encampment perhaps 2 miles from tribal lands. "Too many fires," he whispered to Sani, who pressed close against his legs in response. "More men than traders would need, but organized like soldiers." Through careful observation from multiple hidden positions, Kiko counted at least 20 armed men with military discipline and government-issued equipment. They had set up their camp with defensive positions and regular patrols, but they were also conducting surveys of the surrounding terrain, measuring distances, sketching maps, marking locations with wooden stakes. The implications were ominous. This was not a trading expedition or even a military patrol passing through. These men were planning something that required detailed knowledge of Apache territory. Sani's soft growl drew his attention to movement below them. A single rider was approaching the government camp from the direction of the tribal lands, moving with the easy confidence of someone who expected to be welcomed. Even at a distance, Kiko recognized the distinctive riding style and horse coloring. One of their own people was meeting secretly with the government agents. The betrayal hit him like a physical blow, but Kiko forced himself to remain calm and observe. Intelligence gathering required emotional discipline. Reactions based on assumptions rather than facts had gotten more than one scout killed during his years in the wilderness. He watched the clandestine meeting for over an hour, noting details that might prove important later. The tribal member dismounted and spent considerable time pointing in various directions, apparently providing information about defensive positions, water sources, and approach routes. In return, he received what appeared to be payment, coins, or small goods that he tucked carefully inside his shirt. The identity of the collaborator remained hidden by distance and the angle of observation, but certain details about horse riding equipment and general physical build would help narrow down possibilities once Kiko returned to camp. The journey home took most of the day, because he made several detours to check for additional government horses or signs that the main tribal camp had been discovered. Sani seemed to sense his troubled mood, staying closer than usual and offering the kind of companionship that had sustained him through the darkest moments of his exile. By the time they reached his shelter, the sun was setting, and cooking fires were being lit throughout the canyon. The familiar sounds and smells of evening routine provided comfort, but they were now shadowed by knowledge of the threat gathering just beyond the protective walls of home. Ayana arrived as Kiko was preparing his evening meal, bringing fresh bread and honey collected from wild hives in the upper canyon. Her presence had become a regular part of his daily routine, something he looked forward to with an intensity that surprised him. "You look troubled," she said, settling beside his fire with the easy grace that marked all her movements. "Bad news. From your scouting government forces," Kiko replied, deciding that she deserved to know the full truth. "At least 20 men with military equipment, making maps and measurements. They are planning something. An attack, perhaps? Or perhaps they are choosing locations for a fort, or marking boundaries for a reservation. Any of those possibilities would be bad for our people." Sani accepted her customary share of the meal, but even she seemed affected by the general atmosphere of tension. Instead of settling on her usual observation perch, she remained close to Kiko and Ayana, as if her protective instincts sensed threats that went beyond immediate physical danger. "There is something else," Kiko said after a long pause. "Someone from our tribe met with the government men. I could not identify who, but someone is providing information about our defenses." Ayana's face went pale in the firelight. "You are certain?" "I saw the meeting. I saw payment change hands. One of our own people is betraying the tribe to save themselves, or because they believe cooperation is better than resistance. Who would do such a thing?" "I do not know yet, but I will find out." They sat in troubled silence, watching sparks rise towards stars that seemed more distant than usual. The peaceful canyon that had sheltered Kiko's people for generations suddenly felt vulnerable, exposed to threats that could not be fought with traditional weapons or strategies. "Dakota thinks strength comes from fighting," Kiko said eventually, "but sometimes the greatest strength comes from knowing when not to fight, when to hide, when to seek advantage through patience rather than force." "What will you tell Chief Nalnish?" "Everything I observed, the numbers, the equipment, the organized nature of their camp. He needs to understand the full scope of what we face." "And the collaborator?" Kiko was quiet for a long moment, stroking Sani's golden coat while he considered options. "That is more complicated. Accusations without proof can divide the tribe when we most need unity, but allowing betrayal to continue unchecked will get people killed." "Perhaps there is a third choice," Ayana suggested. "Perhaps the collaborator can be identified and approached privately, given a chance to explain their actions or change their course before public accusations become necessary." It was a wise suggestion, one that balanced justice with the practical need to maintain tribal cohesion. Kiko realized that his time in exile, focused on survival and partnership with Sani, had somewhat simplified his thinking. Problems in the wilderness usually had straightforward solutions: find food, find water, avoid predators, seek shelter. Problems within a community required more subtle approaches. "You would make a good war leader," he told Ayana, meaning it. "As a compliment, I would make a good peace leader," she replied. "War leaders think about defeating enemies. Peace leaders think about preserving their people." As the fire burned down to glowing coals and the night sounds of the canyon settled into familiar rhythms, Kiko found himself grateful once again for the exile that had led him back to this moment. 4 years of hardship had taught him skills that his tribe desperately needed, but it had also led him to a deeper appreciation for the relationships and community bonds that made survival worthwhile. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations with Chief Nalnish and careful investigation of the collaboration they had discovered. But tonight, sitting beside his fire with Ayana and Sani, Kiko allowed himself to hope that love and loyalty might prove stronger than fear and betrayal. The attack came in the hour before dawn, when sleep runs deepest and reflexes move slowest. Kiko woke to Sani's low growl and the almost inaudible sound of someone trying to move quietly across loose gravel. 4 years of sleeping in hostile territory had trained him to wake fully alert, and his hand found his knife even as his eyes searched the darkness for movement. 2 figures approached his shelter with the careful steps of men who knew their business. They moved well, but not well enough to fool senses sharpened by years of avoiding much more dangerous predators than humans. Kiko could see the glint of metal in their hands, knives designed for close, quiet work. Sani launched herself from her ledge with the fluid grace of a creature born to hunt in darkness. Her attack was perfectly silent until the moment she struck the first assassin, driving him to the ground with a force that knocked the wind from his lungs and sent his weapon spinning away into shadow. Her teeth found his throat before he could cry out, but she held pressure without breaking skin, a warning rather than a killing bite. The second attacker hesitated for the crucial instant that separated success from failure in such encounters. Kiko rolled from his sleeping robes and came up in a crouch with his blade ready, positioned between the remaining threat and Sani's vulnerable position. "Drop the knife," Kiko said quietly in Apache. "Your partner lives only because my companion chooses mercy over justice. Make the wrong choice now, and she may reconsider." The would-be assassin was young, perhaps 18, with the lean build of someone who had grown up hard and hungry. Kiko recognized him as one of Takoda's most devoted followers, a warrior named Jaska who had joined the war party during the exile years. "You should not have returned," Jaska said, but his voice lacked conviction. The knife trembled in his grip as he tried to decide between attacking and retreating. "Who sent you?" Kiko asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Was this Takoda's idea, or did someone else decide I was too dangerous to live?" "You bring division and weakness to our people," Chaska replied, repeating words that sounded rehearsed. "The beast you keep makes us look foolish to our enemies. Better that both of you disappear before more damage is done, and murdering me in my sleep would make the tribe stronger." The question seemed to shake something loose in the young warriors. Certainty. His knife lowered slightly as doubt crept into his expression. We thought," he stammered, then stopped as if realizing that his reasoning sounded thin when spoken aloud. Sani maintained her position on the first attacker's chest, but her grip on his throat loosened enough to allow him to speak. "Please," he whispered in Apache, "we meant no true harm. We were told to frighten you away, not to kill." Kiko studied both young men in the growing light of pre-dawn. They were barely more than boys, caught up in adult conflicts they did not fully understand. Their assassination attempt had been poorly planned and worse executed, more likely to get themselves killed than accomplish their mission. "Who told you I could be frightened by threats?" Kiko asked. "Who suggested that a man who survived 4 years alone in the wilderness would run from 2 children with sharp sticks?" The insult had its intended effect. Both attackers straightened with wounded pride, and their fear began to transform into the kind of anger that made people say more than they intended. "Takoda said you had grown soft," Chaska declared. "He said living alone with only a cat for company had made you weak, that you would collapse at the first sign of real opposition, and yet your companion lies beneath my cat while you stand." "There, trembling with indecision," Kiko observed. "Perhaps Takoda's intelligence about my condition was not entirely accurate." He made a gesture that Sani recognized as a command to release but remain ready. The mountain lion stepped back from her captive, but kept her attention focused on both young warriors, prepared to resume her attack if either made a threatening move. "Here is what will happen," Kiko announced in the tone of someone accustomed to having his orders followed. "You will return to whoever sent you and report that I am neither frightened nor weakened by their threats. You will also tell them that Sani is a more formidable protector than they imagined, and that future assassination attempts should be planned with greater care if they hope to succeed." "You are letting us go?" the first attacker asked, rubbing his throat where Sani's teeth had pressed against vulnerable skin. "I am sending you back with a message," Kiko corrected. "There is a difference." As the two would-be assassins gathered their scattered weapons and retreated toward the main camp, Kiko felt the familiar weight of an eagle feather his grandmother had sewn into his medicine pouch years before his exile. The sacred feather represented spiritual guidance and connection to ancestral wisdom, reminding him that some problems required more than practical solutions. The assassination attempt changed the dynamic of his return in ways that went beyond simple politics. Someone had decided he posed enough of a threat to justify violence, which meant his efforts to prove his worth were succeeding too well for certain people's comfort. But it also meant that his position remained precarious, balanced between growing acceptance and organized opposition. Ayana arrived as the sun cleared the eastern rim of the canyon, bringing hot tea and fresh bread that suggested she had been awake and cooking well before normal sunrise. Her timing was too perfect to be coincidental. "I heard Sani growl," she said without preamble. "And I heard voices where there should have been only sleep. Are you hurt?" "Two young fools tried to frighten me away," Kiko replied, accepting the tea gratefully. "They were unsuccessful. Takoda's doing. Almost certainly, though he will deny it if confronted. The boys were too young and inexperienced to plan such a thing on their own." Ayana settled beside him with her own cup of tea, close enough that he could smell the sage smoke that always seemed to cling to her clothing. "This cannot continue," she said. "The tribe cannot afford to fight itself while external enemies gather strength." "Agreed, but I'm not sure how to prevent it without giving Takoda what he wants, my permanent departure." "Perhaps," Ayana suggested, "the answer lies not in preventing conflict, but in changing the nature of the conflict. Instead of fighting about your presence, we need to create a situation where your skills are so obviously valuable that opposition becomes impossible to justify." Kiko considered this while watching Sani groom herself with the methodical care of a predator preparing for the day's activities. The mountain lion had adapted to tribal life with remarkable flexibility, but she never forgot that she was fundamentally a solitary hunter capable of deadly violence when circumstances required it. "What kind of situation?" he asked. "Something that demonstrates beyond doubt that you and Sani represent strength, not weakness. Something that shows how traditional Apache values can incorporate new realities without losing their essential character." Before Kiko could respond, the sound of running footsteps interrupted their conversation. Naiche appeared at the edge of the shelter area, breathing hard and wearing an expression of urgent alarm. "Kiko, Chief Nalnish sends word. One of our children has been taken by white men. They demand tribute for her return, and they threaten to kill her if we do not comply within 2 days." The news hit like a physical blow. Kiko set down his tea with hands that had suddenly grown unsteady, understanding immediately that everything had changed. This was no longer about his personal status within the tribe or political maneuvering between different factions. A child's life hung in the balance, and that reality would reshape all other considerations. The kidnapped child was Nayeli, 8 years old, with bright eyes and a laugh that could be heard across the canyon when she played with her friends. Her grandmother had been teaching her to weave baskets using patterns passed down through 5 generations of Apache women. Now she was somewhere in the hands of strangers who saw her only as leverage in their negotiations with the tribe. The emergency council convened within the hour, bringing together every adult member of the community. In Chief Nalnish's dwelling, the atmosphere was thick with anger, fear, and desperate determination to bring Nayeli home safely. Takoda dominated the early discussion, his red and black war paint freshly applied, and his voice carrying the authority of someone who had been preparing for exactly this kind of confrontation. "This is what comes of weakness," he declared, gesturing toward the message the kidnappers had sent, a crude note written in English demanding horses, weapons, and safe passage through Apache territory. "They take our children because they believe we will not fight back. They see us as defeated people who can be bullied into submission." "What would you have us do?" Chief Nalnish asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Attack their position and risk Nayeli's life? Trade away resources we need for survival on the promise that criminals will keep their word?" "I would have us show them the cost of Apache anger," Takoda replied, his hand moving to rest on his war club. 30 warriors with good horses and better weapons could take their camp and rescue the child before they knew we were coming. Several of the younger men murmured agreement, their faces reflecting the same mixture of rage and frustration that marked Takoda's expression. The desire to respond to violence with greater violence was natural, understandable, and potentially catastrophic. "Their camp is well defended," Kiko said quietly from his position near the entrance. "I scouted it recently and counted at least 20 armed men with military training. A direct assault would likely succeed, but not before they had time to..." "Nayeli." Takoda turned to face him with undisguised hostility. "The exile speaks as if his opinion matters. You bring a demon into our midst, and now our enemies grow bold enough to steal our children. Perhaps there is a connection." The accusation was unfair, but emotionally powerful. Several council members looked uncomfortable, clearly wondering if Kiko's return and the subsequent troubles were somehow related. In times of crisis, people naturally looked for someone to blame, and the outsider with the unconventional companion made an easy target. "The kidnapping happened because our enemies..." "Test our resolve," Kiko replied calmly. "They want to know if we can be broken by threatening what we love most. How we respond will determine whether this was the first such attack or the last." Ayana stood from her place among the women, her beaded necklace catching firelight as she moved. Kiko's scouting revealed the government camp before any of us knew it existed. His intelligence about their numbers and defenses could be crucial for planning any rescue attempt. Pretty words from the medicine woman's daughter. Takoda sneered. "But sentiment will not bring Nayeli home. Only strong action will accomplish that." "Strong action, yes," Chief Nalnish agreed. "But what kind of strength? The strength that wins battles, or the strength that wins wars?" The distinction was important, and most of the council members understood it immediately. A successful rescue of Nayeli would mean nothing if it provoked a larger conflict that destroyed the entire tribe. But failure to rescue her would signal weakness that invited future attacks. "There may be a third option," Kiko said, moving closer to the council fire so his words would carry clearly to everyone present. "A way to rescue Nayeli and demonstrate strength without provoking the larger war that would destroy us all." "Speak," Chief Nalnish commanded. "The kidnappers expect either submission or direct assault. They have prepared for both possibilities, but they have not prepared for a rescue attempt that uses skills and resources they do not understand." Kiko outlined his plan with the careful detail of someone who had spent years thinking tactically about survival in hostile territory. Instead of a direct attack, he proposed infiltrating the enemy camp during the hour before dawn, when guards were tired and attention was focused on the expected approaches. Sani would serve as scout and distraction, using her ability to move unseen and create confusion among horses and sentries. A mountain lion attacking their animals would create chaos, he explained. While they respond to that threat, a small rescue party could reach Nayeli and extract her before the guards realized the animal attack was a deliberate diversion. "And if your plan fails?" Takoda demanded. "If the child is killed because you trusted your pet instead of Apache warriors? Then we will mourn her and know we tried everything possible," Kiko replied simply. "But if we attack with full force, she will certainly die before we can reach her. My way offers hope. Yours offers only revenge." The debate continued for hours, as different council members raised objections, suggested modifications, and struggled with the fundamental question of whether desperate times justified desperate measures. Some supported Takoda's direct approach, others favored negotiation and payment of the demanded ransom. Still others thought Kiko's plan was too risky to attempt. Chief Nalnish listened to all opinions before rendering his decision. "We will try Kiko's plan first. If it fails, we will have lost nothing except time. If it succeeds, we will have saved Nayeli and shown our enemies that Apache ingenuity is more dangerous than Apache anger." "And if Kiko's demon turns against us?" Takoda asked. "If the beast decides human flesh tastes better than deer meat? Then you will have the satisfaction of being right," Kiko said. "But Sani has never harmed any member of this tribe, even when some members tried to harm her. I trust her with my life because she has earned that trust through 4 years of loyalty." As the council disbanded to prepare for the rescue attempt, Kiko found himself alone with his uncle for the first time since his return. Chief Nalnish looked older in the firelight, marked by the weight of decisions that could mean life or death for people he had sworn to protect. "I pray you are right about this plan," the chief said quietly, "and I pray you are right about that. Creature you call companion." "So do I, uncle," Kiko replied. "So do I." Outside, Sani waited patiently in the darkness, her golden coat invisible against the canyon walls, but her presence a comfort to the man who had chosen her over his tribe years before. Tomorrow would test whether that choice had been wisdom or foolishness, whether love could indeed prove stronger than fear. As Kiko prepared his weapons and checked his supplies one final time, he offered a silent prayer to the spirits of his ancestors, asking for guidance and protection, not just for himself, but for the small child whose life depended on the success of a plan that sounded increasingly desperate in the quiet hours before dawn. The rescue began in darkness so complete that even experienced night fighters moved more by memory and instinct than by sight. Kiko led a small party of 6 warriors through terrain he had scouted repeatedly over the past weeks, following paths that avoided the expected approaches to the government camp. Sani padded beside him like a golden shadow, her copper bell wrapped in soft leather to prevent any sound that might alert sentries. The plan was proceeding exactly as rehearsed until Takoda's war club caught Kiko across the back of his skull. The blow came without warning as they paused at the final ridge overlooking the enemy camp. One moment Kiko was studying guard positions and timing their rotations. The next, he was sprawling face first into gravel with stars exploding across his vision and the metallic taste of blood filling his mouth. "I told you the exile could not be trusted," Takoda said in a voice pitched to carry to the other warriors. "He leads us into a trap designed to destroy what remains of Apache resistance." Through the ringing in his ears, Kiko heard the distinctive sound of weapons being drawn, and men positioning themselves for violence. The rescue party was fracturing into opposing factions, with Nayeli's life hanging in the balance and their position exposed to enemy observation. Sani's roar shattered the night silence like thunder rolling through a canyon. But instead of attacking, Takoda, the mountain lion, positioned herself between the feuding Apache warriors and the government camp below, as if she understood that their internal conflict posed a greater threat than any external enemy. "The beast protects its master," Takoda declared, raising his war club for a killing blow. "Even now it chooses loyalty to one man over duty to the tribe." "Wait," gasped one of the older warriors, a man named Honovi, whose judgment was respected by all factions. "Look at the cave paintings behind you." Everyone turned toward the rock wall that formed the backdrop for their confrontation. Ancient artwork covered the stone surface in patterns that had been hidden by shadows until Sani's movement and the warriors' torches revealed them in flickering detail. The paintings depicted scenes that challenged everything the Apache had believed about their relationship with mountain lions. Human figures and great cats worked together in harmony across multiple panels, their partnership clearly celebrated rather than feared. Hunters and lions brought down massive prey side by side. Warriors and cats stood guard together over tribal gatherings. Children played safely in the presence of protective felines who watched over them like benevolent spirits. These paintings are old, Hanovi said, his voice hushed with wonder. Older than our grandparents' grandparents. They show a time when our people and the great cats lived as allies. Impossible, Dakota said, but his certainty was wavering as he studied the detailed artwork. It has always been forbidden to keep predators. The law comes from the spirits themselves. What if the law was wrong? Asked another warrior. What if fear made us forget our own history? Kiko struggled to his feet, one hand pressed against the back of his bleeding head, and approached the cave paintings with the careful attention of someone trying to decipher a message from the distant past. The artwork was sophisticated, clearly, the work of skilled artists who had taken time and care to record important cultural information. The partnerships shown here are not random, he observed, pointing to specific details in the ancient scenes. They show training, cooperation, mutual respect. These are not wild animals that have been captured and tamed. They are companions who have been raised from birth to work with human partners. Like Sani, Ayana said quietly. She had insisted on joining the rescue party despite the dangers, arguing that her medical skills might be needed for Nayeli. Now she stood beside Kiko, studying the paintings with the intensity of someone seeing her entire world shift beneath her feet. The tradition that exiled you, Chief Nalnish said slowly, may not be traditional at all. It may be a recent fear that replaced ancient wisdom. The revelation recontextualized everything about Kiko's banishment and return. If these cave paintings accurately reflected Apache history, then his decision to save Sani had not violated sacred law, but rather honored a forgotten covenant between his people and the great cats of the Southwest. Dakota stared at the artwork, with an expression that cycled through disbelief, anger, confusion, and finally something that might have been shame. His entire worldview, his justification for opposing Kiko's return, his claim to represent true Apache values, all of it crumbled in the face of evidence painted on stone by his own ancestors. We did not know, he said finally. The elders taught us that mountain lions were dangerous spirits, enemies of human prosperity. If they were wrong, they were not wrong, Chief Nalnish said gently. They were afraid. When the white soldiers came with their guns and their hatred of anything they did not understand, our people learned to hide anything that might be used against us. Partnership with great cats would have been seen as proof that we were savages who consorted with demons. So we forgot our own history to protect ourselves from those who would use it to justify destroying us, Kiko said, understanding flooding through him like sunrise after a long night. And in forgetting, we lost knowledge that might have made us stronger, Ayana added. Imagine how much more effective our scouts could have been with mountain lion partners. How much better our defenses would be with such guardians. Sani approached the cave wall and sniffed delicately at the painted figures of her ancient predecessors. Her behavior suggested recognition, as if some genetic memory connected her to the partnerships depicted in stone. She rubbed against one particular painting that showed a great cat and an Apache warrior standing side by side, their poses suggesting deep mutual trust and affection. We have been fools, Dakota said, his voice heavy with regret. I have been a fool. The exile should never have happened, and the opposition to your return was based on ignorance rather than wisdom. The moment of reconciliation was interrupted by sounds from the government camp below. Horses neighing in distress, men shouting orders, the unmistakable commotion of a military force preparing for action. They know we are here, Hanovi said, grimly. Our argument has given away our position. Worse than that, Kiko said, studying the activity in the distant camp through a small telescope he had acquired during his exile years. They are breaking camp and preparing to move. If they take Nayeli with them, we may never find her again. The discovery of the cave paintings had resolved the conflict within the Apache rescue party, but it had also cost them precious time. Now they faced the nightmare scenario of having to mount their rescue attempt against a mobile enemy who was alert to their presence. "Can your plan still work?" Chief Nalnish asked. "It will have to," Kiko replied, checking his weapons and signaling. "To Sani. But now, instead of rescuing a child from a secure camp, we must rescue her from a moving column of armed soldiers who know enemies are nearby." "Then we adapt," Dakota said, his voice carrying new determination born of reconciliation and shared purpose. "Apache have always been masters of adapting to changing circumstances. Tonight we remember how to fight as our ancestors fought, with wisdom, courage, and the help of our four-legged allies. As the rescue party prepared for what would now be a much more dangerous mission, the ancient cave paintings seemed to watch over them, reminding them that some partnerships transcend time, fear, and the mistakes of those who forget their own heritage. The peace pipe passed from hand to hand in the pre-dawn darkness, its sacred smoke carrying prayers to ancestors who had once fought alongside great cats in battles no living Apache remembered. Chief Nalnish held the ornate ceremonial pipe, carved from red pipestone and decorated with eagle feathers that represented the four directions, while each warrior took his turn speaking his intentions to the spirits and asking for guidance. In the desperate mission ahead, the government column was moving faster than expected, using a route that would take them through narrow canyon passages where an ambush might be possible, but escape routes would be limited. Captain Morrison, the fort commander Kiko had observed during his scouting missions, was proving to be a more skilled, tactical leader than they had anticipated. "They move like soldiers who have fought Apache before," Dakota observed, studying the distant line of horsemen through Kiko's telescope. His war paint had been reapplied in patterns that honored both traditional warrior symbols and the newly discovered cave paintings, creating a bridge between old knowledge and new understanding. Morrison served in Arizona Territory during the UC Apache Wars, Ayana said, her voice tight with worry. "I heard traders talking about him at the last gathering. He knows our tactics, our preferences for ambush sites, our methods of retreat and pursuit." This intelligence changed everything about their approach. Instead of facing ordinary soldiers who might panic when confronted with unconventional tactics, they were dealing with experienced Indian fighters who had studied Apache warfare and developed countermeasures for traditional strategies. Kiko knelt beside Sani, his hands working carefully to attach the soft leather pouches that would allow her to carry small supplies during the rescue attempt. The mountain lion submitted to the process with patient dignity, as if she understood the critical nature of their mission. Her amber eyes reflected firelight as she watched the Apache warriors make their final preparations. "She knows this is different from our hunting expeditions," Kiko told his uncle. "Mountain lions are intelligent creatures. They sense when their human partners are preparing for life or death situations." "The cave paintings show great cats wearing similar equipment," Chief Nalnish noted, pointing to details in the ancient artwork that had escaped notice during their initial examination. Pouches for carrying medicine or messages, leather protection. For vulnerable areas, even what appears to be ceremonial decoration for important occasions. The historical continuity was remarkable. Despite generations of separation from their mountain lion allies, the Apache were rediscovering techniques and equipment their ancestors had perfected centuries ago. It was as if the partnership between human and cat contained knowledge that transcended individual memory, passing from one generation to the next through instinct and inherited wisdom. "Tell me again about the girl's location within the column," Dakota said, accepting his role as Kiko's lieutenant in the rescue operation, with a humility that showed how completely his perspective had changed. "Third wagon from the front, heavily guarded but positioned where they can watch her constantly," Kiko replied, reviewing intelligence he had gathered during careful observation of the government camp. They keep her visible to prevent exactly the kind of rescue attempt we are planning. And if she panics when she sees Sani, if she runs toward the soldiers instead of toward us, it was a legitimate concern. Nayeli had grown up hearing stories about the dangerous mountain lion that had caused Kiko's exile. Her first instinct upon seeing Sani might be to flee rather than trust, creating chaos that could get them all killed. Ayana will approach her. First, Kiko said, nodding toward the young woman who had volunteered for the most dangerous part of the mission. Children trust her, and Nayeli has known her since birth. Once the girl understands that rescue is possible, she will be more likely to cooperate with unconventional methods. The plan required precise timing and flawless execution. Sani would create a diversion by attacking the column's horses at the rear, drawing guards away from the central wagons where Nayeli was being held. During the confusion, Ayana would approach the child and prepare her for extraction while Kiko and Takoda eliminated the remaining guards through silent close-quarters combat. "What troubles me," Chief Nalnish said quietly, "is that Morrison chose this route knowing we might attempt a rescue. A man with his experience would not make such a decision unless he had some advantage we have not recognized." It was a sobering observation. Experienced military commanders did not expose themselves to ambush unless they were confident they could turn the situation to their advantage. Either Morrison was more arrogant than his reputation suggested, or he was planning to use the rescue attempt as an opportunity to accomplish some larger objective. "Perhaps he wants to capture Apache warriors alive," suggested Hanovi, the elder warrior whose discovery of the cave paintings had changed everything. Prisoners could be used to pressure the tribe into accepting relocation or signing treaties. Or perhaps he hopes to provoke a larger conflict that would justify military action against our entire people, Ayana said. "If Apache warriors attack a government column and kill soldiers, it could be used as proof that we are hostiles who must be subdued by force." Both possibilities were equally disturbing. Success in rescuing Nayeli might accomplish Morrison's goals more effectively than failure, creating a trap within a trap that could destroy the Apache even as they saved one child. "We proceed anyway," Chief Nalnish declared after a long moment of consideration. "Some risks cannot be avoided when children's lives are at stake. We trust in Apache skill, mountain lion cunning, and the wisdom of ancestors who faced similar choices." The War Council concluded with a ceremony that had not been performed in living memory, a formal blessing of the partnership between human and cat that the cave paintings revealed had once been sacred to Apache culture. Chief Nalnish spoke words in the old language that few present could fully understand, but the meaning transcended literal translation. As the first hint of dawn touched the eastern horizon, the rescue party moved toward their positions with the coordinated precision of hunters who had worked together for years, rather than warriors who'd been feuding until hours ago. The discovery of their forgotten history had not just ended internal conflict, it had awakened knowledge that made it them more effective as a fighting force. Sani moved alongside Kiko with the fluid grace of a creature returning to her natural element. 4 years of hunting together in the wilderness had prepared them for this moment, but the addition of other Apache warriors created new possibilities for coordination and mutual support that neither had experienced before. "When this is over," Takoda said quietly as they reached the point where their paths would diverge, "I owe you an apology that may take the rest of my life to properly express." "When this is over," Kiko replied, "we will be brothers again, as we should have been all along." The exchange carried weight beyond personal reconciliation. If the rescue succeeded, it would prove that adapting traditional Apache values to new circumstances made the tribe stronger rather than weaker. If it failed, at least they would fail together, united by shared purpose rather than divided by fear and misunderstanding. From their observation point overlooking the canyon, where the government column would soon pass, The rescue party could see dust clouds rising in the distance. Morrison's force was maintaining its schedule, moving with the mechanical precision of well-disciplined soldiers who trusted their leader's judgment and their own training. In less than an hour, Apache warriors and their mountain lion ally would test whether love and courage could overcome superior numbers and firepower. The cave painting suggested that such partnerships had once been capable of extraordinary achievements, but those victories belonged to ancestors who had lived in a different world with different enemies. "Remember," Chief Nalnish said, in final instruction to his warriors, "we fight not just for Nayeli, but for the future of our people. How we conduct ourselves in this battle will determine whether the Apache survive as a free people or disappear into the reservations where so many tribes have already vanished." As the sun climbed higher and the sound of approaching horses grew louder, Kiko placed his hand on Sani's golden head and felt the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. Whatever happened in the next few hours, they would face it together, as partners. As the ancestors had intended, the time for preparation was ending. The time for action had arrived. The government column entered the canyon exactly when Kiko's calculations predicted, their horses' hooves raising dust that caught morning sunlight like golden smoke. Captain Morrison rode at the front with the confident posture of a man who believed himself in complete control of the situation. His uniform crisp despite days of desert travel, and his hand resting casually on his holstered pistol. Nayeli sat in the third wagon, as intelligence had indicated, her small form almost lost, among the supplies and equipment that surrounded her. Even at a distance, Kiko could see that she appeared unharmed but frightened, her dark eyes constantly scanning the canyon walls as if hoping to see familiar faces among the rocks. The attack began with Sani's lightning assault on the column's rear guard. The mountain lion materialized from seemingly solid stone, her golden coat perfectly camouflaged against sandstone walls until the moment she launched herself at the trailing horses. Her roar echoed off canyon walls like thunder, magnified and distorted until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. Horses screamed and reared in panic, their terror infectious as it spread through the entire remuda. Soldiers shouted contradictory orders while fighting to control their mounts, creating exactly the kind of chaos that Kiko had hoped for. But Morrison's response revealed why he had chosen this particular route for transporting his prisoner. Instead of sending men to investigate the disturbance, the captain immediately ordered his forward units to establish defensive positions around the wagons, while designated marksmen took positions on higher ground. His soldiers moved with the practiced efficiency of men who had drilled this exact scenario, suggesting that the Apache rescue attempt was not just anticipated, but welcomed. "It's a trap within a trap," Kiko muttered, understanding flooding through him as he watched soldiers deploy with suspicious precision. Morrison had not just expected a rescue attempt. He had planned to use it as an opportunity to capture or kill Apache warriors while making their efforts appear futile. But the captain had not anticipated the tactical flexibility that came from a partnership with a mountain lion. Sani's assault on the horses was serving its intended purpose of drawing attention and creating confusion, but it was also providing intelligence about enemy positions and capabilities that no human scout could have gathered. Her enhanced senses allowed her to detect hidden soldiers, identify weak points in their defensive arrangement, and communicate warnings to Kiko through subtle changes in her behavior. The tracking knife Kiko had crafted during his exile years felt perfectly balanced in his hand as he moved through terrain too rough for horses, using approaches that Morrison's men had not thought to guard. 4 years of surviving in hostile wilderness had taught him to read landscapes like maps, finding paths where others saw only obstacles. Takoda emerged from a concealed position behind the lead wagon, moving with the fluid grace of a warrior who had rediscovered his true heritage. His war club struck down 2 guards before they could raise an alarm, while his other hand used a traditional Apache throwing stick to disable a 3rd soldier at longer range. The rescue was proceeding faster than planned, but it was also costing more in violence than Kiko had hoped. Each soldier they eliminated was someone's son or husband, a man who probably had no personal hatred for Apache people, but was following orders in a conflict he might not fully understand. "Nayeli!" Ayana's voice carried clearly across the battle. Noise as she reached the wagon where the child was being held. "It's me, Ayana. We've come to take you home." The little girl's face transformed with hope and relief as she recognized her rescuer. But her expression changed to confusion and fear when she saw Sani approaching through the combat chaos, the mountain lion's golden coat now streaked with dust and her amber eyes reflecting the intensity of battle. "The cat won't hurt you," Ayana said quickly, reading the child's terror. "She's here to help. Kiko is here too, and he's brought Sani to protect us." Morrison's voice cut through the noise like a blade, shouting orders that revealed the true nature of his trap. "Let them take the girl. I want the warriors alive. Surround them, but do not kill unless absolutely necessary." The revelation changed everything. This had never been about preventing Nayeli's rescue. It had been about capturing Apache fighters who could be used as leverage against the entire tribe. Morrison was willing to sacrifice one child if it meant gaining prisoners who could force tribal surrender or justify military action against Apache lands. Kiko found himself caught between rocks and hard places, literally and figuratively. So, canyon walls that had seemed to offer tactical advantage now felt like the sides of a trap, with enemy soldiers positioned to prevent escape while avoiding lethal force that might kill valuable prisoners. But Morrison had made one critical miscalculation. He had planned for Apache warriors operating within traditional tactical constraints. He had not planned for the psychological impact of a mountain lion fighting alongside human partners, or the tactical flexibility such a partnership provided. Sani's roar shattered the morning air again. But this time it was not directed at horses or soldiers. It was a call to her human pack, a signal that meant, "Follow me," in the ancient language that connected apex predators across species lines. The real battle was just beginning. Captain Morrison's Medal of Honor caught sunlight as he dismounted from his horse and approached the center of the battle with the measured stride of a man accustomed to command under fire. The decoration had been earned during brutal fighting in Arizona territory, where he had learned to respect Apache tactics while developing countermeasures that had proven devastatingly effective. But as he watched his carefully laid trap beginning to unravel, Morrison faced a tactical situation. Unlike anything in his military experience, the mountain lion was not behaving like a wild animal or even like a trained attack dog. Sani moved with the intelligent purpose of a true combat partner, coordinating her actions with Apache warriors in ways that suggested communication beyond simple signals. She would distract soldiers at precisely the right moment for Kiko to strike, or create openings that allowed Takoda to advance, or position herself to cut off retreat routes that might otherwise allow enemies to escape. "Impossible," Morrison muttered, watching through his field glasses as the golden cat seemed to anticipate tactical developments before they occurred. "Animals don't fight with that kind of strategic awareness." His aide, Lieutenant Collins, was equally amazed by what they were witnessing. "Sir, should we modify our orders? The original plan assumed we were dealing with conventional Apache tactics." Morrison studied the evolving battle with the calculating mind that had made him successful in previous campaigns against tribal forces. His trap was still functional. The canyon walls still prevented easy escape, his soldiers still outnumbered the Apache warriors, and capture rather than killing remained a viable objective. But the presence of the mountain lion was changing the psychological dynamics of the engagement in ways that threatened to demoralize his men. Soldiers trained to fight human enemies were struggling to adapt to an adversary who moved like liquid shadow, and struck with the precision of a natural predator. "Hold positions," Morrison ordered. "Maintain the capture protocol. They're still outnumbered, and they still have to extract the girl through terrain we control." The direct confrontation between Morrison and Kiko came when the Apache warrior reached the wagon where Nayeli was being held. The captain had positioned himself as the final obstacle between the rescue party and their objective, his service revolver drawn but not yet aimed at any specific target. "Stand down, warrior," Morrison called out in creditable Apache, demonstrating knowledge of the language that suggested deeper preparation than mere tactical planning. "You've fought well, but this ends now. Surrender and the child goes free. You're offering to trade her freedom for our captivity," Kiko replied in English, his own fluency surprising the soldiers within hearing range. "That's not much of a bargain." "It's the only bargain you're going to get," Morrison said. "My orders are to bring you in alive if possible, dead if necessary. But the girl doesn't have to be part of that equation." The exchange revealed the true nature of the government's strategy. This had never been about one kidnapped child or even about controlling Apache movement through traditional territory. This was about eliminating resistance leadership while creating justification for larger military operations against tribal lands. Sani's appearance beside Kiko shifted the balance of the confrontation in ways that went beyond simple tactical advantage. The mountain lion's calm confidence in the face of multiple armed enemies demonstrated a level of trust and training that challenged everything Morrison thought he knew about the relationship between humans and wild predators. "Your cat is remarkable," Morrison said, his professional appreciation evident despite the adversarial circumstances. "I've never seen anything like the coordination between you. How is such partnership possible?" "Because it was always possible," Kiko replied. "My people knew this once, before fear made us forget our own history, before men like you made us afraid of anything that might be used against us." The philosophical dimension of their conflict was not lost on Morrison, whose own military career had been built on studying and defeating tribal resistance. He understood that he was facing not just tactical innovation, but cultural revival, the rediscovery of knowledge that could make Apache warriors far more formidable than conventional intelligence suggested. "If you walk away now," Kiko continued, "Nayeli goes home safely and no one else dies today. But if you continue this fight, you'll learn why our ancestors were never truly conquered, only temporarily suppressed." Morrison's hand tightened on his weapon as he considered options that all carried significant risks. His military training argued for pressing the advantage while he still held it. His Medal of Honor had been earned through exactly the kind of aggressive tactics that current circumstances seemed to demand. But his years of fighting Apache warriors had also taught him to recognize when tactical situations were shifting beyond his ability to control them. The mountain lion represented an unknown variable that could turn apparent victory into devastating defeat. The captain's decision came not from military calculation, but from human conscience, triggered by the sight of 8-year-old Nayeli watching. The confrontation with eyes full of fear and hope. "Stand down," Morrison ordered his men, holstering his weapon with the deliberate motion of someone making a choice that would define the rest of his career. "Let them go." The battle was over. But the war between old and new ways of living was just beginning. The wedding bracelet that Ayana placed on Kiko's wrist had been crafted from mountain lion fur and eagle feathers, bound together with sinew and blessed with sage smoke according to traditions that predated living memory. Its mate, worn by the bride, told the same story in beadwork and leather, the union of different paths into one shared journey that honored both individual strength and communal harmony. 6 months had passed since Nayeli's rescue, and the canyon that served as home to the Apache people had been transformed by the rediscovery of their forgotten partnership with the great cats. 3 other mountain lions now lived among the tribe, each bonded with a warrior who had demonstrated the patience and wisdom necessary for such relationships. "The old ways and the new ways," Chief Nalnish said as he performed the wedding ceremony, that united his nephew with the medicine woman's daughter. Sometimes they are the same ways, forgotten for a time but never truly lost. The celebration that followed was unlike any the tribe had experienced in decades. Children played freely, while mountain lion guardians watched over them with the protective instincts of natural family members. Elders shared stories about ancestors who had once lived in similar harmony with the great predators. Warriors demonstrated new hunting techniques that combined traditional Apache stealth with feline cunning. Most remarkably, the wedding guests included Captain Morrison and a small delegation of government representatives who had come to negotiate a formal peace treaty that would recognize Apache sovereignty over their traditional lands. The captain's decision to release Nayeli and her rescuers had cost him his military career, but earned him something more valuable: the respect of people he had once been ordered to conquer. "I spent 20 years fighting Apache warriors," Morrison told the assembled tribal council during the treaty discussions. "I thought I understood your capabilities and limitations. What I witnessed during that rescue attempt taught me that I understood very little about what your people might accomplish if given the opportunity." The peace agreement that emerged from those negotiations was unlike any treaty that had been signed between the United States government and tribal nations. Instead of relocating the Apache to distant reservations, it established their canyon homeland as an autonomous territory where traditional governance would be respected and cultural practices would be protected. In return, the Apache agreed to serve as guides and scouts for government forces dealing with more aggressive tribal groups, sharing their unique knowledge of desert warfare and their remarkable partnership with mountain lions. It was the arrangement that recognized both cultures had something valuable to offer the other. Sani had produced 2 cubs during the winter months, and watching Kiko interact with the small cats provided insight into how such partnerships had originally developed. The cubs imprinted on him as naturally as they would have bonded with their mountain lion mother, creating relationships based on mutual trust and shared survival needs. "She teaches them to hunt," Ayana observed, watching Sani demonstrate stalking techniques to her offspring, while Kiko provided commentary and guidance. "But she also teaches them to trust humans, to see us as pack members rather than prey or enemies." The integration of mountain lions into Apache society required practical adaptations as well as cultural ones. New laws governed the care and training of the great cats, ensuring that only individuals with appropriate temperament and skill would be permitted to form such partnerships. Special dwellings were constructed to provide the cats with territory that satisfied their need for space, while keeping them close enough for daily interaction with their human companions. Perhaps most importantly, the tribe established formal recognition of the partnerships in their legal and social structures. Mountain lion companions were acknowledged as family members with rights and protections equal to those granted to humans. Their welfare became a community responsibility, not just the concern of individual partners. Takoda had proven to be one of the most successful of the new mountain lion partners, his natural leadership abilities translating well to the complex relationship dynamics required for such partnerships. His cat, a magnificent male he had named Cochise in honor of a legendary Apache leader, served as both hunting companion and diplomatic symbol when meeting with other tribes. "I spent years believing that preserving Apache culture meant resisting all change," Dakota admitted during a quiet conversation with Kiko and Ayana. "What I have learned is that preserving culture sometimes means remembering changes that happened so long ago they feel like traditions." The success of the Apache mountain lion partnerships had attracted attention from other tribal groups who wanted to learn similar techniques. Delegations arrived regularly from neighboring communities, seeking guidance on how to rediscover their own forgotten relationships with the natural world. These educational exchanges created a network of intertribal cooperation that made all participating communities stronger and more resistant to outside pressure for relocation or cultural assimilation. Knowledge shared freely became knowledge that multiplied, creating possibilities that no single tribe could have achieved in isolation. As Kiko stood beside his new wife, watching the sunset paint the canyon walls in shades of gold and red that matched Sani's coat, he reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 4 years of exile had seemed like punishment at the time, but it had actually been preparation for a role he could never have imagined. "Do you ever regret saving her?" Ayana asked, nodding towards Sani, who was teaching her cubs to navigate the rocky ledges that would become their hunting territory. "I regret the pain that decision caused," Kiko replied honestly, "but I cannot regret saving a life, even when saving that life led to complications I did not expect. And now? Now I understand that some choices echo across generations. What seemed like a simple act of compassion became a bridge between the world our ancestors knew and the world our children will inherit." As full darkness settled over the canyon and the first stars appeared in the desert sky, Kiko and Ayana walked home together, followed by Sani and her cubs. Behind them, the sound of celebration continued, marking not just a wedding, but the renewal of ancient bonds that had always been stronger than fear.